All right? Let me tell you what most people believe right now. They believe that if America decides to march into Iran, it'll be a quick, clean operation. Shock and awe. Regime change. Maybe 6 months of chaos. Then a new government. New oil contracts. And Washington gets to plant another flag in the Middle East. That's the fantasy. That's what the pundits are selling on cable news between pharmaceutical commercials. And if you believe that narrative, I genuinely feel sorry for you, because you are about to watch the most consequential strategic miscalculation in modern history, and you won't even understand what hit you until it's too late. Here's the reality. The moment US boots hit Iranian soil, America doesn't win a war. America triggers its own unraveling. I'm not being dramatic, I'm being precise. We are living through the terminal phase of American unipolar dominance, and Iranian ground war would be the single event that accelerates that collapse from a slow decline into a free fall. The question isn't whether America can defeat Iran militarily. It probably can. The question is what it costs. And those costs aren't measured in dollars or body bags alone. They're measured in the global trust, institutional authority, and reserve currency supremacy that the entire American economic model is built on. Lose those, and you've lost everything. Not metaphorically. Literally, everything. So wake up or don't. But at least understand the game before it ends. Now, to understand why Iran specifically is a tripwire, you need to understand the architecture of American power, not as it's taught in high school civics class, but as it actually functions in the real world. Okay? After 1945, the United States didn't just win a war. It built a system. Bretton Woods, the petrodollar, NATO, the IMF, the World Bank, all of these weren't acts of generosity. They were instruments of structural dominance. Every country that wanted access to global trade had to root itself through American-controlled institutions. Every barrel of oil in the world had to be purchased in US dollars. That meant the entire planet was functionally working to sustain American purchasing power. That's not capitalism. That's a protection racket with better branding. For decades, this system held because America had the military credibility to back it up. Nobody challenged the dollar because nobody wanted to challenge the aircraft carrier sitting in their regional waters. The threat was real. The architecture was stable. Then came Iraq. Then Afghanistan. 20 years and $7 trillion later, what did America actually accomplish? Iraq is now a functional client state of Iran. Afghanistan returned to the Taliban within weeks of the American withdrawal. The military credibility that held the entire financial architecture together began to visibly crack. Other nations noticed. China noticed. Russia noticed. Saudi Arabia noticed. And they began quietly, systematically to build off-ramps from the dollar system. The BRICS expansion, UN-denominated oil trades, central bank gold accumulation at a pace not seen since the 1970s. These aren't accidents. These are deliberate structural moves by nations who are betting correctly that the American system is entering its final chapter. Iran sits at the absolute center of this transition. And that's why this matters far beyond any regional conflict. All right? Let's walk through this step by step because the logical chain here is airtight and you need to follow every link. Iran is not Iraq. Let's establish that first because the people pushing for military action are running the exact same playbook they ran in 2003, pretending the contexts are interchangeable when they are fundamentally different. Iran has a population of 90 million people. It has a hardened military doctrine built specifically around asymmetric warfare against a technologically superior adversary. It has a network of proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Shia militia networks spread across Iraq and Syria that function as a distributed military architecture. You don't bomb that away. You activate it. The moment US ground forces enter Iran, every single one of those nodes goes live simultaneously. You're not fighting a country, you're fighting a regional insurgency spanning 5 nations at once. Now, what does that do to the global economy? Immediately. Let's be blunt about this. Iran controls access to the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the world's oil transits through that choke point every single day. Iran has repeatedly demonstrated with drones, with mines, with limpet attacks on tankers that it can disrupt that traffic in ways that are cheap, deniable, and asymmetrically devastating. A ground war doesn't eliminate that capability. It maximizes it. Oil goes to $150, $180, maybe $200 a barrel inside the first 3 months. What does that do? Global inflation, supply chain rupture, industrial recession in Europe and East Asia, the countries that are already structurally weakest, Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, parts of Latin America, start seeing food system collapses. We're talking famines, real ones. And here's where it gets strategically catastrophic for Washington specifically, okay? Because here's the thing about high oil prices in a prolonged Middle Eastern ground war. They don't hurt China the way they hurt America's allies. China has spent the last decade building strategic petroleum reserves, locking in long-term energy contracts with Russia, Iran, and Gulf states, and developing overland pipeline infrastructure that completely bypasses maritime choke points. While Europe and Japan are getting crushed by $200 oil, Beijing is insulated, and while Washington is bleeding financially and politically, Beijing is consolidating its position as a stable, rational alternative to American-led chaos. Every month that war continues, the global south drifts further from Washington and closer to Beijing. Not because they love China, because they're making a rational calculation about which system is more likely to still be functional in 20 years. Meanwhile, back home, what happens? The US defense budget is already consuming an unsustainable percentage of federal expenditure. A ground war in Iran, not an air campaign, a ground war, would require a commitment that makes the Iraq surge look modest. We're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of troops sustained for years against an enemy that has been preparing this specific scenario since 2003. The fiscal pressure alone would be destabilizing. Add to that the political fracture. The American public has zero appetite for another Middle Eastern ground war. The political coalition required to sustain such a war simply does not exist. You'd be looking at a presidency-destroying level of domestic opposition within 18 months, maximum. And a politically fractured America, hemorrhaging money, bogged down in a grinding insurgency with its allies screaming about oil prices and its adversaries consolidating, that is not a superpower. That is an empire in its death rattle. And this is a part that nobody wants to say out loud. This is the thing that gets people called alarmist or defeatist or anti-American. So let me be absolutely clear about what I'm telling you. I am not saying America loses a war with Iran. I'm saying it doesn't matter. Because the war itself, the act of starting it, sustaining it, being unable to cleanly end it, that process is the weapon that finishes American primacy. Not Iranian missiles, not Chinese maneuvering. The act itself, America's greatest enemy in this scenario, is America's own decision to pull the trigger. Think about what you'd be watching in real time. You'd be watching the United States military, the most expensive and technologically sophisticated force in human history, unable to pacify a country of 90 million people with deep cultural roots, mountainous terrain, and 40 years of doctrinal preparation for exactly this fight. Every week of stalemate is a broadcast to every nation on earth that the American military guarantee, the foundational promise that has underwritten the entire post-war order, is hollow. And once that credibility is gone, it does not come back. You can't rewind that broadcast. Dollars start flowing out of US Treasury bonds. The reserve currency premium starts eroding. The cost of American borrowing goes up. The American standard of living, which is artificially elevated precisely because the whole world subsidizes it through dollar demand, starts compressing. Not gradually, sharply. And the people who get crushed first aren't the elites with diversified portfolios and offshore accounts. They're the working and middle class who have no hedge, no escape valve, and no political representative who will tell them the truth about what happened or why. That is what is at stake. Not a foreign policy debate, not a geopolitical chess match. The material conditions of life for hundreds of millions of ordinary Americans. This is the thing that should make you sit up straight. So what does all this mean? What's the actual takeaway here? The lesson isn't that America is evil or that Iran is righteous or that any of the simple moral framings that dominate public discourse are useful. They're not. The lesson is structural. It's about the physics of power, the hard, cold logic of what happens when an overextended empire makes one strategic miscalculation too many. History is full of these moments. Britain after Suez, France after Dien Bien Phu, the Soviet Union after Afghanistan. The pattern is brutally consistent. The moment a declining hegemon chooses a war it cannot win cleanly, it accelerates its own replacement. The war doesn't cause the decline. The decline was already happening. But the war removes the carefully managed illusion of invincibility that was allowing the system to function on borrowed time. Once that illusion is gone, the structural weaknesses underneath it become visible and targetable all at once. America is not uniquely exempt from this pattern. No empire ever is. And the strategic window in which Washington could have managed its transition from unipolar dominance to a negotiated multipolar role, That window is narrowing with every month of policy chaos, institutional degradation, and geopolitical overreach. An Iranian ground war would likely slam that window shut permanently. The people in Washington who understand this, and some of them do, are not the ones currently dominating the conversation. The ones dominating the conversation are the ones who have never had to personally bear the cost of the wars they prescribe. That's a problem of accountability structures, not intellect. And it's a problem that historically only gets resolved one way, through catastrophic failure that is impossible to spin. I'm hoping we don't have to learn this lesson the hard way. But I've stopped betting on institutional wisdom in systems under the kind of pressure that Washington is currently under. Now, here's where I want to leave you, and it's not with a subscribe button or a like prompt. Those things are irrelevant to what we've just discussed. What I want you to do is sit with the logical chain we've just walked through and test it. Pull it apart, go find the counter arguments. The people who believe a swift Iranian operation is viable. The people who think dollar dominance is more resilient than I'm suggesting. The people who think Chinese strategic positioning is overestimated. Read them. Seriously engage with them. And then come back and tell me where the logic breaks down, because I am genuinely interested in the strongest version of the opposing case. Because in the next installment, we're going to go deeper. We're going to look specifically at the dollar's structural vulnerabilities independent of any Iranian scenario, why the petrodollar system is already fracturing from the inside, what the BRICS currency architecture actually looks like at a technical level, and what the realistic timeline for a dollar confidence crisis looks like if the current trajectory continues unchanged. That conversation is more complex, more technical, and frankly, more important than the war scenario we just unpacked. Because the war is a trigger, but the underlying ammunition was already loaded years ago. The people who understand what's coming are already positioning accordingly. The question is whether you're going to be ahead of that curve or behind it. That's not a rhetorical flourish. That's the only question that actually matters from here. We'll get into it. Stay close.